For over a century, physics has been trapped between continuous spatial manifolds and discrete particle quanta. When calculations generate infinite thermodivergences, physicists apply renormalization, artificially subtracting infinities to force a finite prediction. Treating absolute infinity as a computational error leaves these models mathematically functional, but ontologically incomplete. Standard bottom-up frameworks, like Zermelo-Fraenkel set theory or the Standard Model, begin in the middle of the sequence. They tacitly assume the rules of logic and smuggle geometric structure into the void from nothing. The theory of infinity, or TOI, offers a rigorous mathematical alternative. It asserts that absolute infinity is not an anomaly to be deleted. It is the active, ontological primitive of the cosmos. Instead of ignoring the continuous noise of the void, this framework processes those infinite thermodynamic degrees of freedom, structurally forcing them into stable, discrete integer rails. To observe exactly how continuous spatial fields crystallize into discrete reality, we look to the astrophysics of a quasar. A quasar operates across three distinct topological regions: the continuous inward pull of the accretion disk, the absolute boundary of the event horizon, and the orthogonal exhaust of the bipolar jets. These three distinct physical zones map precisely to the mathematical decompilation of infinite fields into Euclidean geometry. Unlike standard computational physics, this topological mapping functions without ad hoc regularizers or gauge redundancies. The math behaves exactly as the physical structures behave in the void. Auditing this process requires the strict epistemological standard of the friction versus fiction protocol. By tracking the exact mathematical residuals left behind during this three-stage transition, we can map the precise origin of thermodynamic geometry. This chart outlines the mathematical phases of the quasar dynamic. Look at the core equation under the accretion panel. It measures the continuous accumulation of infinite mathematical fluid. This definite integral evaluates the total literal mass, with the numerator containing the golden angle. The golden angle drives radial expansion. Opposing this is the denominator, the golden ratio, simulating immense gravitational pressure that forces convergence. This yields a compressed, stable output evaluating to 0.184791. Infinite material falls inward over an infinite domain, yet the mathematical processing yields a finite, measurable topological weight just prior to intersecting the event horizon. The accretion mass strikes the event horizon panel, the boundary where spatial dimensions compress inward. The math forces this mass through an eighth-dimensional sieve, isolating its eighth root. Scaling that root by spatial parity produces a scalar output of 1.61944. The friction versus fiction protocol mandates that we audit this specific output against the target constraint that initiated the compression in the first place. That target boundary is the perfect golden ratio constraint, resting at 1.61803. Comparing the output against the target reveals an exact numerical gap of 0.00141. Standard computational physics rounds away residuals like this, dismissing them as floating point artifacts. By utilizing apophatic decompilation, we strictly monitor and categorize this residual as a verified physical phenomenon. This precise mathematical friction is formally defined as topological luminosity. This value represents the specific thermodynamic energy cost of forcing infinite continuous mass into a discrete Euclidean boundary. In this framework, the 0.00141 residual is the exact mathematical exhaust that manifests physically as Hawking state radiation. Massive pressure at the event horizon guarantees energy unable to fall into the singularity escapes orthogonally. Mathematically, the compressed fluid undergoes an inverse topological ejection, driven by the inverse cosine polynomial operator. When the chaotic mess of continuous variables strikes this absolute barrier, the input shatters. The ejection outputs two perfectly crystallized discrete Pythagorean harmonics. The real branch yields the 1/3 harmonic, and the imaginary hyperbolic branch yields the 3/2 harmonic. This bypasses the infinite fluid entirely, interacting directly with the structural boundary to securely output rigid, stable geometry. When continuous fluid reaches its absolute limit, it flawlessly quantizes into discrete integer rays. Under extreme topological forces, the math behaves identically to physical matter. This dynamic extends past localized black holes. This diagram maps the foundational architecture of reality, built entirely on strict number theory. The continuous void produces a collision of two infinite approach tangents, the acute orientation for expanding dimensions and the grave for contracting dimensions. When these infinite forces collide at the crystalline theta boundary, they systematically isolate invariant topological features from the continuous void. This collision forges the absolute double join, definitively locking a discrete physical shell together with a complex inner charge. At the center of this collision sits the Tor monad. It operates as a self-referential topology, continuously observing, auditing, and constantly correcting its own thermodynamic states through infinite geometric recursion. This toroidal engine functions as a top-down mechanism, filtering the infinite thermodynamic noise of the void into the bounded physical states we perceive as reality. The rules of this framework reach beyond spatial geometry and standard particle physics, scaling directly into cognitive system science. The human mind itself operates as a quasar dynamic. In the accretion phase, the mind endlessly absorbs continuous, chaotic sensory data from the external environment. The mind then attempts to force that infinite continuous data into recognizable discrete concepts, functioning exactly like the eighth root boundary of the event horizon. This mapping identifies cognitive strain as the specific thermodynamic friction of consciousness. It is the measurable energy cost generated as the brain's finite capacity attempts to compress the infinite complexity of sensory reality into discrete, manageable concepts. And when cognitive pressure peaks, the system breaks through the noise. It generates a sudden orthogonal burst of logic, known as a structured insight. The fluid mechanics of the cosmic void and the biological systems of the human mind are bound by the exact same geometry. Continuous, frantic variance must eventually crystallize into discrete, harmonic truth.